What are you doing with the Barrett.50, sweetheart? The question cut through the desert air like the first crack of distant thunder, sharp, unnecessary, and full of the kind of confidence only men like him carried. Lieutenant Commander Derek Halford didn't mean it cruelly. Not exactly. But it landed the way all those questions did. Heavy, dismissive, the kind that made silence feel like defiance. Staff Sergeant Kira Vance didn't flinch. Didn't even look up from the rifle laid out before her like a piece of herself spread open to the sun. The Macmillan TAC-50 gleamed under the Afghan heat, its long barrel stretching like the horizon itself, steady, waiting, unyielding. She was checking torque settings, running her fingers along the scope mount with the focus of a surgeon. The commander's words were just background noise, one more test in a world built from them. Halford stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching her. He was built like the kind of man who'd earned every scar. 2 decades of night raids, of door-breaching adrenaline, of brotherhood forged in gunpowder. To him, the Barrett wasn't a rifle, it was a statement, and seeing it in her hands just didn't fit the picture in his head. He said it again, this time quieter. "What are you doing with the Barrett.50? She clicked the scope ring into place and finally looked up. Her eyes were calm, unreadable. "Prepping for a shot, sir." That was all. No challenge, no bite, just the truth. He studied her for a moment as if waiting for her to flinch. But she didn't. She never did. Kira Vance, 27 years old, 56, lean, and still in a way that unnerved people. The kind of stillness that came from years behind a scope, learning how not to move, how to breathe so quietly even your heartbeat became a whisper. She wasn't supposed to be here, not by the old rules. But rules had a funny way of bending under results. Her record spoke for itself. 2 tour, 17 confirmed kills, a calm, surgical precision that had saved more men than any of them would ever know. But even then, to some, she was still an anomaly, a question mark holding a rifle too big for her frame and too powerful for their comfort. The base around them buzzed with the restless hum of routine, rotors thumping in the distance, generators growling against the heat, the dry wind carrying the smell of dust and diesel. Forward operating base Cushman, Helmand Province, looked more like a collection of shipping containers than a fortress. Kira had been there for 3 months, attached to a joint task force supporting SEAL operations across the province. Her title, Long-Range Interdiction Specialist. In reality, that meant one thing: she was the final option. When plans failed, when the risk was too high, when boots on the ground weren't worth the blood, they called her. The others joked that her rifle did the walking. But that morning, nobody was laughing. Halford's team was prepping for a high-risk compound raid 2 valleys over. Intel had pinned a Taliban commander named Bashir Nazi, an architect of IED networks that had taken too many lives. The man was elusive, always moving, always one step ahead. But this time, they had him. The problem: his compound sat tucked between ridgelines, open ground in every direction. A direct approach meant suicide. Halford's instinct was to hit fast, hard, and close. That's what SEALs did. But the Tactical Operations Center didn't like the odds. Too much exposure, too many unknowns. That's when someone floated the alternative, a long-range elimination. One shot, one opportunity. No boots on the ground, no firefight, no casualties. Clean, surgical, distant. Halford didn't like it. And when he found out the shooter assigned was Kira Vance, he liked it even less. Later that night, she sat on the edge of her cot, elbows on her knees, hands still smelling like gun oil. The soft hum of the generator filled the silence. The desert wind whispered through the gaps in the plywood walls. She pulled a small notebook from her duffel, her logbook. Every page was filled with numbers: wind speed, altitude, range tables, environmental variables. Precision lived in ink. Emotion didn't belong there. But tonight, her hands lingered on the page before she wrote. She could still hear Halford's tone, not the words but the doubt behind them. It wasn't new. It wasn't personal. It was just the air she'd learned to breathe. Her father had warned her about it. "People will test you twice," he'd said, back in Montana. "Once to see what you can do, and again to see if you can handle them not believing it." He'd been a Marine Scout sniper once. Gulf War. He'd never talked about it much, but she remembered the quiet weight in his eyes when he did. He'd built her first rifle, a Remington 700 in .308, and taught her to breathe with the wind, not against it. Her mother had handled the math. Ballistic coefficients, spin drift, the Coriolis effect. She used to write equations on napkins while Kira cleaned rifles at the kitchen table. Between the two of them, they'd raised a girl who could read the wind like language and treat distance like poetry. At 12, she'd fired her first M40. The recoil bruised her shoulder, but her father had only said, "You're stronger than that kick. You just have to decide you are." That line had followed her everywhere: Fort Benning, Kandahar, Cushman. And now into tomorrow. At 5:30 the next morning, the mission briefing filled a room that smelled like stale coffee and dust. A map was projected on the wall, red for the target compound, blue for the firing position. Distance, 3,200 meters. Wind unpredictable. Window, less than an hour. Halford stood at the front, jaw tight, eyes scanning the team. "This isn't a training range," he said, his voice steady. "If we miss, we lose him. 6 months of work gone." He looked at her. "You sure you can make this shot?" She nodded once. "Yes, sir." He didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't trust it. But he didn't stop her either. They moved out before dawn. Kira walked point with her spotter, Corporal Hayes, a quiet kid from Ohio who didn't talk much but saw everything. They climbed slow, careful, following the ridge until the valley opened below them. By the time they reached the overwatch point, the sun was climbing, and the heat was already shimmering off the rocks. Hayes unpacked the rangefinder, his voice steady. 3,247 meters, line of sight confirmed. Kira didn't reply. She was already building the nest, sandbags, bipod, rifle prone on the ridge. Every movement was deliberate, every breath a calculation. She opened her data book and started feeding in numbers. Barometric pressure, temperature, humidity, angle. At this range, the bullet would stay airborne for nearly 4 seconds. A lifetime in combat. A dozen things could go wrong in that time. Wind shifts, thermal updrafts, even a butterfly caught in the path. She tuned it all out. Focus narrowed to heartbeat. "Talk to Longshot, target mobile," the radio crackled. "Repeat, target mobile inside the compound. Window closing." Kira's voice came back calm. "Copy." She exhaled, eyes locked through the loophole scope. Figures moved in the courtyard, too far for faces, just silhouettes in the glare. Then one stepped into the open, black vest, white tunic, Bashir Nazi. Hayes called wind, left to right, .2 mil. "Hold." Mirage shimmered, heat wavered, she waited. Then it steadied. Finger to trigger. Slow breath in. Half exhale. Break. The TAC-50 roared, echoing off the valley walls like thunder rolling through the mountains. The rifle kicked hard into her shoulder, dust exploding around the muzzle brake. 4 seconds later, impact. Nazi dropped where he stood. Hayes blinked, hit confirmed. The radio erupted. "Target down, repeat, target down." Kira didn't smile, didn't move. She cleared the rifle, bolt back, chamber empty, just another equation solved. But in the operation's tent miles away, Derek Halford stood frozen before the drone feed, watching the man fall. His voice was barely audible. 3,247 meters, Jesus Christ. The room stayed silent. Then someone whispered, "That's got to be a record." Halford picked up the radio, his tone different now, steady, quiet, almost reverent. Long shot, this is actual. That was a hell of a shot. Well done. That evening, when she walked back to the base, Halford was waiting by the range. The sun dipped low, bleeding into gold across the horizon. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her. Then, "I owe you an apology, Sergeant. I underestimated you." She locked the rifle case and looked up at him. "Respectfully, sir, I'm used to it." He nodded once. "You shouldn't have to be." She didn't reply. Some truths didn't need answers. The desert wind moved between them, soft and wordless. And for the first time, Halford didn't see a woman with a rifle. He saw a soldier who just redefined what distance meant. But for Kira, it wasn't about records or validation. It was about something quieter. In a world full of noise, she'd found power in silence. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. "Do you ever feel it afterward?" The question came from Hayes. His voice was low, uncertain, the kind of question that lingered in the air too long before anyone answered. They were sitting beside a rusted water tank behind the range that night, boots off, silence between them. The sky above the Helmand Desert was endless, stars scattered like glass dust on black velvet, the kind of silence you only get after violence. Kira didn't look at him. She was cleaning the TAC-50, slow, deliberate movements. Bolt, chamber, scope, the rituals that kept her steady. "Feel what?" she asked finally. He hesitated. "The shot after it's done." She thought about that for a long moment. The barrel gleamed under the floodlight. She could still smell the faint metallic tang of burned powder from earlier that day. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "but not the way you think." "How then?" She looked out into the distance, toward the dark ridgelines that had framed her kill shot hours before. "It's not about the man who fell," she said. "It's about the silence that follows. You start to wonder if the world should sound different after something like that. But it doesn't. It just keeps going." Hayes didn't reply. He just nodded slowly. They both knew that silence well. Word of the shot spread through the base faster than any official debrief. By the time she'd finished cleaning her rifle, everyone already knew. Someone in the comms tent had leaked the range number 247 meters. Someone else said it broke a NATO record. Another claimed command was going to put her up for a silver star. Rumors lived longer than truth in a place like Cushman. She kept her head down, walking past groups of soldiers who suddenly stopped talking when she passed. Some stared in quiet awe, some with the same old doubt, just wearing a different mask now, envy. Halford caught up with her near the operations tent the next morning. He wasn't the kind of man who said thank you twice, but the way he looked at her said enough. "Leadership wants you in the debrief at 900, he said. "Understood." He hesitated before turning away. "You did good, Vance." That was all, but in Halford's language that was an entire paragraph. The debrief room was cool and sterile, a far cry from the dust outside. Screens flickered with maps, telemetry data, and heat signatures from the drone feed. Across the table sat a small panel of officers, Joint Special Operations Command, serious men with serious eyes. Colonel Tate led the session. He was the kind of officer who didn't waste words. "Staff Sergeant Vance," he said, "walk us through it." Kira did, not with pride or theatrics, just the details. Distance, elevation, barometric pressure, angle of shot. She spoke like a scientist describing a controlled experiment, not a soldier recounting a kill. Hayes chimed in, confirming the wind calls, the data entries. Every number lined up. Every correction matched the final impact. Tate nodded slowly. 3247 meters. That's further than most of our rangefinder verification tables go. "Yes, sir," Kira said. He leaned back in his chair. "You realize what this means?" She stayed silent. He smiled faintly. "It means you've done something no one in this theater has done before. Maybe no one in the entire U.S. Armed Forces. Congratulations, Sergeant. She didn't respond to the compliment because she didn't feel it. What she felt was the weight behind his words, the kind of recognition that didn't come without cost. When the meeting ended, Tate asked her to stay behind. The room emptied until it was just the two of them and the hum of the projector. He folded his hands. You're being looked at for a transfer, special applications group. She frowned. Special applications. It's not official yet, but they want shooters who can perform under uncertainty, precision under pressure. Kira didn't move. Black missions. He didn't confirm, didn't deny, just said, you'll get more details if it's approved. She nodded once, but her mind was already turning. She heard the rumors, off-books operations, no insignias, no paperwork, no names on the after-action reports. Missions where failure didn't mean reprimand, it meant vanishing. For some soldiers, it was the ultimate honor. For others, the beginning of the end. That night she sat outside her quarters, rifle case beside her, listening to the low hum of the generators. The base always sounded alive at night, distant laughter, radio chatter, choppers circling overhead. But underneath it, there was a kind of loneliness. The kind that didn't come from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who would never really know you. She took out her father's old letter. The paper was soft from years of folding. His handwriting, blocky, careful, ran across the page. Remember, he'd written, the rifle isn't a weapon, it's a question. Every time you pull that trigger, you're answering something about yourself. She stared at the words until they blurred. Then she folded the letter back and slid it into her pocket. Because deep down, she didn't know what question she'd answered today. Over the next week, things changed subtly. The way people talked to her, the way conversations stopped when she walked in. Even the air around her felt different, respect mixed with unease. Hayes started calling her legend. She told him to stop, he didn't. The SEAL team treated her differently now, too. Halford no longer questioned her capabilities, but there was distance in his respect. The kind that came when people didn't know how to fit you into their world anymore. They still ran range drills together, still trained, still prepped, but something had shifted. On the third morning, he approached her as she was zeroing her rifle. You ever think about what comes next? He asked. She didn't look up. I don't usually get to decide that. He nodded slowly. You might this time. 3 days later, the orders came down. Temporary reassignment to a forward intelligence unit. No location specified. Report to Kabul for transit. She stared at the paper for a long time, the black ink neat and cold. Halford found her at the helipad just before she left. The dawn light cut across the dust, painting everything gold. He handed her something, a small, weighty coin stamped with a trident and a Latin phrase around the edge. Fortis fortuna ad juvat. Fortune favors the brave, she translated. He smiled faintly. My team doesn't hand those out lightly. You earned it. She closed her hand around it. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, he said. Just don't disappear. She didn't promise she wouldn't, because in her line of work, promises were luxuries. The helicopter's engines thundered to life, rotors kicking up dust and wind. She climbed aboard, the TAC-50 slung across her chest. As the ground fell away beneath her, she looked out across the expanse of the Helmand Desert, the ridges, the dry riverbeds, the nothingness stretching forever. For a moment she let herself feel it, the enormity of it all, the silence, the distance. Then she turned away. Kabul was different, cleaner, more controlled. The base here wasn't made of dust and improvisation, it was steel and order, the kind of place where missions didn't exist on paper. She was met by a man in civilian clothes, middle-aged, sharp-eyed. He introduced himself as Evans. No rank, no title, just a voice that carried authority without effort. Staff Sergeant Vance, he said, glad you made it. He led her through a narrow corridor into a room filled with maps and satellite imagery. "We've been watching you," he said. "Your performance with the TAC-50 was exceptional. You made a shot that shouldn't have been possible." Kira said nothing. Evans continued. "We handle unconventional assets here. Precision shooters, reconnaissance operators, pilots, specialists. Missions that don't go through the usual channels. We need people who can make decisions at the edge of probability." He paused, studying her expression. "You interested in that kind of work?" Kira met his eyes. "I'm interested in making a difference." Evans smiled faintly. "Good answer." He handed her a folder marked confidential. Inside, mission briefs, coordinates, and a name, Operation Silent Veil. "Your new assignment," he said. "You'll be briefed en route." She closed the folder and stood. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow." That night she didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bunk, staring at her rifle case under the dim light. The hum of the air conditioning replaced the desert wind, but the silence felt the same. She thought about the look in Halford's eyes when he'd said, "Don't disappear," about Hayes asking her if she ever felt it, about her father's letter. The further she got from the desert, the more she felt like she was stepping into something colder, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous. She wasn't scared of dying. She was scared of losing what made her care about living. She ran her thumb along the coin in her pocket. Fortis fortuna ad juvat. Fortune favors the brave. But bravery, she was learning, wasn't always about facing the enemy. Sometimes it was about facing yourself when the silence finally spoke back. Outside, the city slept. Inside, she finally closed her eyes. And for the first time in weeks, she dreamed. Not of war, not of targets, but of the Montana mountains and the way the wind had once carried her father's voice. The plane vibrated beneath her boots, a low, steady hum that felt almost like a heartbeat. Outside, darkness swallowed the world. No stars, no horizon, just the endless night over southern Afghanistan. Kira sat alone in the back, her TAC-50 case strapped beside her, her new orders sealed inside a folder marked Eyes Only. The engines droned like distant thunder. The last thing she remembered before boarding was Evan's voice. "You'll be briefed in the air. No recordings, no transmissions. Everything you see stays in your head." Now she waited. The man across from her looked too calm for someone flying into the unknown. Mid-30s, sharp eyes, flight jacket with no insignia. He was flipping through a small tablet, completely unbothered by the turbulence. After 10 minutes of silence, he finally spoke. "You must be the sniper." Kira looked up, studying him. "You must be the pilot." He grinned faintly. "Captain Ian Rourke, technically civilian, but don't hold that against me." She didn't answer. He leaned forward. "They told me you broke a record." "Records don't matter in war," she said. He smiled again, softer this time. "No, but legends do." She looked away. "Legends get people killed." The flight landed hours later at a forward strip carved out of nothing. No runway lights, no towers, just a handful of vehicles and shadows moving under moonlight. They were met by a man in plain clothes. No rank, no patch, just a beard, a radio, and an air of quiet authority. "Vance Rourke," he said, voice low. "Welcome to Forward Point Echo. You'll be briefed inside." The makeshift command center was a converted hangar. Bare walls, red lights, maps pinned across the far side. Evan's voice came through a secure link on the far table. "Good, you're both there." He didn't waste time. Operation Silent Veil is a high-value intercept. Target codename Ghost Shepherd. Ex-asset gone dark. Former intelligence liaison, knows names, routes, handlers. He's selling data to the wrong people. Rourke leaned back unimpressed. "So why us?" Evans looked straight into the camera. "Because the last two teams sent after him never came back. He's deep in the mountains near the Pakistan border, Terrain's impossible. We can't send a full unit. We need a two-person cell, mobility, precision, and silence. Kira's voice was quiet. Rules of engagement. Not capture, termination. Rourke exhaled slowly. So it's an execution. Evans didn't blink. It's containment. He's already compromised agents in 3 sectors. If that information leaves the region, a lot of people die. Kira nodded once, understood. Evans' gaze lingered on her through the screen. I chose you, Sergeant, because you don't miss, and because you don't ask unnecessary questions. Then the feed cut. Hours later, they were in the air again. Rourke's aircraft, a modified Blackhawk painted flat gray, cut through the night low and fast. Inside, the cabin was stripped bare except for 2 harnesses and a crate of gear. He piloted one-handed, scanning his instruments. You always this quiet? Kira checked her rifle, voice calm. Talking doesn't make me shoot straighter. He laughed softly. You'd hate poker night. She ignored him, peering through the small window at the terrain below. Mountains rose like broken teeth, ridges cutting through the desert like scars. It was beautiful in a brutal way, the kind of landscape that reminded you how small you really were. After a long silence, she said, Why'd you take this job? He shrugged. Because I got tired of flying people who thought they were gods. Figured if I'm gonna risk my neck, I'd rather do it with someone who actually knows what they're doing. She studied him for a moment. There was something honest about his voice, a rough edge that didn't feel rehearsed. Still, she kept her distance. Trust was currency out here, and she'd learned never to spend it easily. They landed just before dawn on a plateau that overlooked a valley of stone and silence. The mission was simple on paper. Infiltrate, locate the ghost shepherd, confirm identity, eliminate, extract before sunrise. But simplicity was a lie. The terrain was jagged, the air thin, and the enemy invisible. Rourke stayed with the bird, keeping comms silent. Kira moved ahead alone, her rifle broken down and packed tight. Every sound felt amplified, the crunch of gravel, the whisper of wind through her earpiece, her own heartbeat syncing with her steps. She reached a ridge overlooking a cluster of stone buildings half buried in the mountainside. Through her scope, she scanned the area. No movement, no guards. It felt wrong. Long shot to Raven, she whispered. No visible security. Are we sure he's here? Rourke's voice came through soft. Thermals picked up one signature inside the main structure. Could be him. She adjusted the zoom. A faint glow moved near a window. One person, alone. She exhaled. Copy, setting up position. Time slowed. The world narrowed to her breathing and the crosshairs. She could see him now, man in his 50s, unshaven, worn clothes. Not the kind of figure you expected to hold the lives of dozens in his hands. He sat by a table covered in maps and an old satellite phone. It would have been easy. One shot sent her mass lights out. But something in the scene pulled at her. He wasn't surrounded by fighters or guards. He was writing. She magnified again. The pen trembled in his hand. There was a photo beside him, a woman, a child. And suddenly, it didn't feel like a target anymore. It felt like a person. Long shot to Raven, she whispered. I have visual confirming identity. Rourke's voice was steady. Cross-checking now, yeah, that's him. She adjusted her cheek weld, aligning the reticle. Her breathing slowed. In, out. Finger on the trigger. Then, movement. A second figure stepped into view. A woman, local clothing, carrying food. She set it down in front of him, said something softly and left. The man didn't move for a while, just stared at the photo again. Kira's heartbeat shifted. Raven, what's the collateral protocol? She whispered. 0 exposure, no witnesses. She hesitated. He's not alone. Say again. There's a civilian, female. Static, then Rourke's voice hardened. Evans said termination only, no interference, execute when clear. Kira stared through the glass. Longshot copies, she whispered. But her finger didn't move. The seconds dragged. The wind picked up, rustling through the rocks. The man stood, stretching, walking toward the door. He stepped outside into the pale dawn light. Perfect shot, clean, predictable. She could end it here. And yet something in her refused. Maybe it was the photograph, or the way his shoulders slumped like someone carrying too much memory. Maybe it was the echo of her father's words. The rifle isn't a weapon, it's a question. And this question didn't feel simple. She toggled the comms. Raven, hold position. I need confirmation on row. Static again. Then Rourke's voice, tighter this time. Vance, this isn't a debate. Orders are orders. I know, she said quietly. But orders didn't feel as absolute as they used to. The man began walking toward a small path leading down the mountain. If she let him go, he'd vanish again. If she took the shot, she'd erase someone's father, someone's husband, maybe even someone's redemption. Her scope trembled slightly, just enough to remind her she was human. Then her radio crackled, not Rourke this time, but a new voice. Evans. Longshot, this is command. Execute immediately. Do not delay. She froze. Evans never broke radio silence in the field. That meant he was watching the feed. Confirmed, sir, she said quietly. Target unarmed, currently outside. Execute, he repeated. And then the line went dead. Kira's world shrank to the reticle, the wind, the sound of her own pulse. Every part of her training screamed to obey. This was the job, the oath, the mission. But beneath it all, another voice whispered, quiet, steady, familiar. Her mother's voice, the math doesn't care who you are, but you should. She took her finger off the trigger. Raven, she said softly, we're aborting. Rourke's reply came sharp, you can't. Abort mission, she repeated. I'm not taking the shot. There was silence on the line. Then slowly, copy. The helicopter engines flared somewhere below, signaling extraction. Kira broke down her rifle with practiced speed, heart pounding, adrenaline flooding her veins. She just disobeyed a direct order. And in their world, that wasn't courage. That was career suicide. But for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't felt since Montana, certainty. Back at base, Evans was waiting, his expression unreadable. You disobeyed a termination order, he said. Kira stood at attention. Yes, sir. Do you have any idea what that means? Yes, sir. He studied her face, searching for fear. There was none. Finally, he sighed. You think you're the first person who hesitated. You're not, but you might be the first who did it for the right reason. She blinked, sir. He leaned back. You were being tested. The target wasn't real. The feed was live, but the man was an actor under supervision. We needed to see if you'd follow orders blindly or think for yourself. For a long moment, Kira said nothing. Then quietly, and if I'd taken the shot? Evans' eyes hardened. Then you'd be on a different kind of list. She exhaled slowly, the weight of realization settling in. Rourke leaned against the wall nearby, arms crossed, watching her with quiet respect. Told you legends are dangerous, he murmured. Evans stood. Congratulations, Staff Sergeant, you just passed the real test. Welcome to the program. That night, Kira sat outside the hangar, watching the desert sky again. The stars looked closer now, but somehow colder. Rourke joined her, offering a canteen. So what now? She took it, sipped, and handed it back. Now I learn what the real fight looks like. He nodded, glancing at the horizon. You know, you could have taken the easy shot. Maybe, she said, but sometimes the hardest trigger to pull is the one you don't. He smiled faintly. I'll drink to that. The silence between them felt different this time, not empty, just earned. And somewhere beyond the mountains, the world kept turning, unaware that a woman with a rifle had just proven that strength wasn't measured by how far you could shoot, but by how far you were willing to see. They called it the program. No unit designation, no insignia, just a name whispered between the right doors and forgotten by morning. Kira arrived at the facility before dawn. No one greeted her. No banners, no briefings, just a single soldier in black fatigues who wordlessly led her down a narrow corridor lined with reinforced glass and flickering fluorescent lights. It smelled sterile, too clean to belong anywhere near war. Her escort stopped at a steel door. "This is you," he said, and left. Inside, the room was small, cot desk, plain gray walls, no windows. On the desk sat a single folder marked orientation. She opened it. Inside, a single page. One sentence. Your next mission begins with forgetting who you were. The days blurred together. They didn't call it training, but that's what it was. Only it wasn't like any training she'd ever known. There were no rifles, no drills, no shouting instructors. Just a series of tests that didn't make sense until much later. Isolation chambers, deprivation rooms, long sessions in front of screens that flashed images faster than thought, paired with questions like, what is loyalty? Would you pull the trigger if you didn't believe in the cause? What's worse, being wrong, or being right when nobody listens? Kira answered carefully at first, like there was a hidden right answer, but over time she stopped trying to play along. On the 10th day, they brought her to a long corridor filled with soundproof glass booths. Inside each, soldiers sat facing walls, staring at their reflections. The woman guiding her, a psychologist named Dr. Lentz, spoke without looking up from her tablet. They're learning to separate impulse from emotion. We remove the noise until only purpose remains. Kira frowned. And what happens when there's nothing left? Lentz finally looked at her. Then they're ready. Night came without stars. Kira lay awake on her cot, eyes tracing the ceiling seams. The air was cold, recycled, too still. She missed the desert, the wind, the smell of dust and oil, the sound of something alive. Now everything here felt ghostly, perfectly engineered. She reached into her pocket and felt the coin Halford had given her, Fortis Fortuna ad Juvat. The words didn't comfort her anymore. Not here, not where fortune felt manufactured and bravery was just a data point. Her thoughts drifted to Rourke. She hadn't seen him since the test mission, but sometimes, during the debrief sessions, she'd hear a helicopter far above the compound, one that wasn't supposed to be there. And she'd wonder if he was flying it. 2 weeks later, Evans returned. Same calm voice, same unreadable expression. He met her in a small briefing room, just the two of them, a metal table between them, a folder placed perfectly square in front of him. "You passed," he said. Kira didn't answer. Evans smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how many don't. People think following orders makes them soldiers, but the truth, the best ones question everything, just not out loud." He slid the folder toward her. "Your next assignment." She didn't open it yet. "You said the last mission was a test. What's this one?" "This one's real." He paused. "You'll be part of an embedded support team, 2 analysts, 1 field operator. The target isn't a man this time. It's an idea." She frowned. "Define idea." He leaned forward. "Information. Leaks. Someone inside our network has been moving classified intelligence through civilian aid channels. You'll identify and neutralize the leak before it reaches foreign hands." "Neutralize," she repeated. "Meaning what exactly?" Evans didn't blink. "Meaning it doesn't reach anyone by any means necessary." They flew out that night. This time, the helicopter's cabin lights were off, just the faint red glow from the instrument panel. And Rourke was there, hands on the controls, cigarette tucked behind one ear, that same easy calm in his posture. "Told you we'd meet again," he said. Kira strapped in beside him. "You knew I'd make it through." He smirked. "Didn't bet against you." She looked at him. "You bet." "Not money," he said, eyes forward. "Just time. I said you'd last 2 weeks before they started trusting you. You made it in 11 days. You owe me 3. She almost smiled. Almost. He noticed. "Careful, Vance, they might think you're human." She looked out the window. "Maybe I'm not sure anymore." They landed near a small compound outside Jalalabad, once a NATO logistics hub, now a staging post for contractors who didn't technically exist. Their mission brief was simple, but everything in the tone of it screamed otherwise. 3 civilians, 2 analysts, and a communications technician were suspected of funneling encrypted satellite data through humanitarian agencies. On paper, they were here to process refugee logistics. In reality, one of them was bleeding secrets. Evan's voice echoed in her head. "Find the leak, contain it, quietly." Rourke stayed with the aircraft while she entered the compound. The 3 civilians were already assembled in a small prefab room, all looking equally nervous. One man, glasses, mid-40s, fidgeting. Another, younger, calm but sweating through his collar. The third, a woman, maybe late 20s, steady gaze, voice low. "Staff Sergeant Vance," the woman said. "We were told someone from command would visit, but not why." Kira's eyes flicked across the room, reading details, body language, eye movement, breathing rhythm. She spoke evenly. "Just a routine evaluation. I need to go through your communication logs." The older man nodded quickly. "Of course, they're on the terminal." But as she approached, she saw it, the faintest flicker of hesitation in the woman's eyes. The kind that said she already knew what Kira was looking for. Hours later, after cross-checking the logs, it was clear. The leak wasn't data, it was intent. Buried within the aid transmissions was a hidden string of coordinates, military routes disguised as supply drop locations. Someone was helping insurgents avoid drone patrols. The signature key matched one terminal, the woman. Kira confronted her quietly, outside, under a flickering floodlight. The woman didn't deny it. She didn't even look afraid. "You don't understand," she said softly. "They're not the enemy, they're families, children. The raids are killing them faster than the Taliban ever did." Kira stared at her. "You leaked patrol grids, you compromised U.S. operations." The woman's voice shook. "I tried to save lives." And there it was, the fracture, the human part of war no one wanted to touch. Duty versus conscience. Orders versus empathy. "Please," the woman whispered. "If you report this, they'll bury me. But if you don't, maybe you'll remember what it feels like to do the right thing." Kira didn't sleep that night. She sat outside the compound with her rifle across her knees, staring into the horizon where the mountains swallowed the stars. She thought about everything that had brought her here, the precision, the obedience, the silence. She'd always believed clarity came from control, but now she wasn't sure control was clarity at all. At 400, Evan's voice came through her secure comm. "Report." She hesitated, identified the leak. "Name." She looked back at the prefab hut, where the woman slept inside. "Contained," Kira said. "No further threat." Evans paused. "Meaning?" "Meaning handled." "Understood." The line went dead. At sunrise, Rourke found her still sitting outside. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She didn't answer. He studied her for a moment. "So what happened?" She looked at him. "You don't want to know." He sighed. "You're probably right." She stood, dusting off her pants. "We're done here." He raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" She glanced toward the hut again. "Yeah, we're done." Back in Kabul, Evans was waiting again. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He just handed her a sealed envelope. Your evaluation is complete, he said. Congratulations, you're now officially part of the program. Kira took it, but she didn't open it. Evan studied her. You don't look relieved. Should I? He smiled faintly. You've earned something most people never get, the freedom to operate without permission. Or without conscience, she said quietly. He didn't deny it. That depends on how you define freedom. That night she sat in her quarters again, the city lights blinking through the narrow window. The folder lay open on her desk, inside her new call sign, Orion 9. Below it a mission directive stamped in red, eyes unseen, words unspoken. She traced the letters with her finger, her reflection staring back at her from the glass. Once she'd joined the army to prove she could stand shoulder to shoulder with anyone. Now she wasn't sure if what she'd become even stood among people anymore. Her hands still smelled faintly of gun oil, her heartbeat was steady, her mind silent. But somewhere deep down, beneath the layers of discipline and obedience, something small still flickered. The part of her that missed the wind, the sound of laughter, the simplicity of Montana mornings. She didn't know what to call it. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was memory. Or maybe it was the last piece of herself she hadn't yet given away. Rourke found her the next day, leaning against the flight line fence, watching the horizon. He tossed her a coffee. Word is you're official now. She nodded, so they say. He studied her face. You don't seem thrilled. Guess I'm still figuring out what official means. He smirked. Means you're one of us now. She took a slow sip, eyes fixed on the horizon. And what are we exactly? He shrugged, the quiet between the storms. She looked at him. And what happens when the storm never ends? He didn't answer. Later, as the sun set over the city, painting the mountains blood red, she closed her eyes and whispered something only the wind could hear. I'm still me. She needed to say it out loud. Not for anyone else. For herself. Because in this world of silence and shadows, that truth, fragile and fading, was all she had left. They told her the program wasn't about missions. It was about balance, maintaining the world's silence between conflicts. But silence, she was learning, had a sound of its own. It hummed beneath the surface of every operation, every order, every lie. Her first mission as Orion 9 came without ceremony. No flags, no salutes, just a briefing packet slid across a metal table. Evans sat across from her, his voice low and measured. Target extraction, not elimination. She raised an eyebrow. Extraction. Asset recovery, he said. A deep cover operative compromised in the north. Name, Callan Shaw. You'll find him, stabilize him, and get him out. Rourke leaned against the wall behind her, arms folded. And the catch? Evans gave a thin smile. You've been around long enough to know there's always one. He tapped the folder. Shaw isn't just compromised. He's gone silent. We don't know if he's been turned. You'll have to make that call on site. Kira stared at the file photo, a gaunt man with intelligent eyes, ex-intelligence, maybe early 40s. His expression carried something familiar. Weariness. Guilt. Evans continued. We have an extraction corridor through the Panjshir Valley. 48-hour window before the satellite handoff resets. You're the only one close enough to reach him in time. Kira nodded once. When do we leave? Now. The Blackhawk's engines roared to life, slicing through the Afghan dawn. Kira sat strapped in beside Rourke, both silent beneath the whine of the turbines. She studied the mission packet again, coordinates, contact frequencies, contingency codes. Her gut told her this one wasn't standard, too much vagueness, too few details. Rourke caught her expression. You smell it too, huh? She looked up. What? The lie. He grinned faintly. Every op's got one. Question is whether you find it before it finds you. She didn't answer. just adjusted her rifle sling and stared out the window as the landscape below changed from city haze to raw, jagged wilderness. They touched down 20 clicks east of the valley, a forgotten stretch of rock and river where old Soviet tanks rusted into the sand. Rourke killed the engines, eyes on her. "You sure about this? We could wait for satellite recon." She shook her head. "By then, Shaw's either dead or gone." He sighed. "Then let's make it quick." Kira disembarked, moving silent, fluid, rifle low, senses open. The valley was too still. No birds, no wind, just the hiss of dust. After a mile, she spotted the compound, a broken mud brick structure leaning into the mountainside, half swallowed by time. She raised her scope, scanning windows, corners, shadows. Nothing moved. "Raven, eyes on structure," she whispered. "No heat signatures." Rourke's voice came back, crackling. "Copy. You've got 3 minutes. After that, I pull you out, friendly or not." "Understood." She moved in. Inside, the air smelled of rot and damp stone. Broken radios, spent shell casings, bloodstains long dried to rust. And then movement. A cough, low, human. She pivoted, rifle raised. "Callan Shaw." Silence. Then a voice, cracked and hoarse. "Who's asking?" She found him sitting against the wall, half-conscious, pistol hanging from his hand. His beard was overgrown, his clothes torn, eyes bloodshot from dehydration. "Evans sent me," she said. "You're compromised, we're here to exfil." He laughed, a hollow sound. "Evans, of course." She frowned. "You don't sound surprised." "Should I be?" "Let's move." He didn't, just stared at her. "You don't even know what this is, do you?" She tightened her grip. "Stand up, Shaw." He didn't move. "They didn't send you to rescue me, Orion. They sent you to erase me." Her blood went cold. He saw it in her eyes before she said a word. "You didn't know," he whispered. "They never tell the truth to the new ones." "Explain," she said sharply. He smiled sadly. "I was one of them, the program, before Evans, before the structure changed. We weren't ghosts back then, we were human. But humans make mistakes. We start asking questions about who we're really serving." He coughed hard, blood on his hand. "When I found out what they were doing, the black channels, the staged intel leaks to justify funding, I tried to get out. That's when they sent me to vanish." She shook her head. "You expect me to believe this?" "I expect you to look." He tossed something toward her, a flash drive, caked in dust. "Plug that in when you're far from here. You'll see for yourself." "Why me?" she asked. "Because you still hesitate before you pull the trigger." His eyes softened. "They hate that." "Raven," she said into her calm, "I have the target." "Copy," Rourke replied. "Condition." "Alive but injured. Extraction ready." "Roger, wheels hot in 2." Shaw struggled to his feet. "You shouldn't go back," he said quietly. "Once you know the truth, they stop letting you leave." She stared at him. "Then where do you go?" He smiled faintly. "Where their reach ends." She didn't know if he meant it as a warning or a farewell. By the time they reached the extraction zone, Rourke was packing by the chopper, eyes scanning the ridge. "Who the hell is this?" he asked. "Target recovered," Kira said. "We move now." They lifted off fast, engines straining as bullets snapped from below, stray rounds, no pattern. A warning. Once they cleared the valley, Shaw slumped in his seat, barely conscious. Rourke called over the noise. "We're being tracked. That's not random fire." Kira checked her feed. Encrypted comms lit up red. "Incoming transmission, Evans." "Orion status." She hesitated. "Asset secured." "Confirm elimination." Her stomach turned. "Negative, extraction in progress." "Orion," Evans said slowly, "you misunderstood the directive. The target is compromised. Orders are termination." Kira's pulse quickened. "He's not hostile." "Orders, Orion." Not this time. Silence, then static. Rourke turned to her. You just crossed the line. Maybe it was the wrong line to begin with. He stared at her, then looked back at the horizon. You realize they'll come after both of us now. She nodded, yeah. He grinned faintly. Then we'd better not make it easy. They flew low, hugging terrain until the fuel gauge screamed for mercy. At dusk, they touched down near an abandoned Afghan village, clay walls half collapsed, windows hollow. They set Shaw down inside one of the intact rooms. He was barely coherent, muttering fragments of sentences. Evans, Black Ledger operations, not what they told us. Kira knelt beside him. Stay with me. He blinked slowly. You'll see, Orion, it's all in there. Names, accounts, deaths that never happened. Then his eyes closed. Kira checked his pulse, weak but there. Rourke stood at the doorway, scanning the horizon. We're running out of time. If they're tracking us by satellite, we're already compromised. Kira pulled out the flash drive Shaw had given her, small, innocent-looking. But it felt heavy. She connected it to her wrist terminal, the screen lighting up with encrypted files, operations, financial routes, coordinates. Then one header froze her blood. Project Orion Personnel Trials. She opened it. Lines of data appeared, psychological profiles, performance metrics, biometric logs. And there near the top, Vance Kira L. Phase IV candidate. Her throat tightened. Rourke, she whispered, I wasn't recruited, I was selected. He looked over. What do you mean? She turned the screen toward him. They've been monitoring me since before Bennying. My file's older than my service record. Rourke frowned. So what is this then, some kind of experiment? Kira's voice dropped. Not an experiment, a design. They heard the rotors before they saw them. Black silhouettes against the dying light, two hellos fast. Rourke cursed, they're here. He grabbed the flight tablet, punching in coordinates. We can't outfly them, not with fuel this low. Kira glanced at Shaw, still unconscious. We can't leave him. Rourke shook his head. If we stay, we die. She met his eyes. Then we make them choose. She moved fast, dragging Shaw to the far corner, setting the detonator on the doorframe. 5 minutes, she said, enough to fake a crash. Rourke looked at her. You sure about this? Not at all. He grinned. Good, thought you lost your edge. They moved together, wordless, practiced. When the enemy hellos swept in, the first explosion tore through the village, sending a plume of smoke skyward. From above it looked final. No movement, no survivors. Just the illusion of compliance. Hours later, miles away, the desert was silent again. A faint fire burned on the horizon, the remnants of their lie. Rourke set the helicopter down in a narrow canyon, blades ticking to a slow stop. Kira sat beside Shaw, watching the flames flicker in the distance. Rourke finally broke the silence. So what now? She looked at the flash drive in her hand. Now we find out what's really inside this thing. And then... She took a deep breath. Then we decide what kind of ghosts we want to be. He nodded slowly, the weight of the moment settling between them. For the first time since she joined the program, Kira felt something shift, not just around her but in her. She wasn't running from orders anymore. She was running toward truth. And the truth, she knew, didn't live in the silence they'd built. It lived in the noise they were told to fear. Later, as the wind howled through the canyon, Rourke killed the lights, letting darkness take them. Kira closed her eyes, her father's words echoing softly in her mind. You're stronger than that kick. You just have to decide you are. When she opened them again, she was Orion 9 anymore. She was Kira Vance, soldier, sniper, survivor. And for the first time, she was aiming not to obey, but to understand. They didn't talk much the first night. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound like guilt. The desert around them was endless, pale rock and black shadow, wind carving shapes no one would ever name. Rourke sat near the chopper, stripping the comm modules, killing every signal beacon they had. Kira crouched by the canyon wall, watching the horizon fade into the long quiet of night. Shaw was unconscious in the back, his breathing shallow but steady. Every few minutes she'd check him, pulse, temperature, eyes, still alive, still human. She wasn't sure how long that would last for any of them. By dawn, Rourke had the transmitter cores laid out in a neat line beside the fire. He crushed the last one under his boot and tossed the broken casing into the sand. "Nothing they can trace," he said. Kira nodded, eyes still on the sky. He looked at her. "You're thinking about what's on that drive." She didn't answer. "You know we can't just plug it into anything," he continued. "If Evans has a trace protocol built into it." "He does," she said, "but we're not using their system." Rourke frowned. "Then whose?" She turned to him. "There's someone I trust. Used to run signals for Task Force Epsilon before the unit was buried. If anyone can ghost our connection, it's her." He raised an eyebrow. "You trust her?" Kira hesitated. "I used to." "That's not a yes." "No," she said softly, "it's not." They moved at dusk, low and slow through the valleys, using the helicopter only to cross impassable ridges. Fuel was almost gone by the time they reached the outskirts of an abandoned NATO listening post. Rust on the gates, whined through empty corridors. It looked like the skeleton of a war that never ended, just shifted hands. "This place give you déjà vu?" Rourke asked. Kira scanned the buildings. "Feels like every base I've ever been on, same ghosts, different uniforms." They set up inside the communications room. Dust on the consoles, rats in the corners, old satellite dishes pointed at nothing. Kira cleared a table and laid the flash drive in the center. For a moment she just stared at it. It looked ordinary, but she could feel what it carried, the kind of truth that burns people alive. When she finally powered the console, the screen flickered to life, blue light cutting through the dark. Rourke stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes on the monitor. She entered a bypass key, the one her contact had once shown her, a backdoor into the old Epsilon network. The terminal hummed. A code prompt blinked. Then text flooded the screen. "Project Orion archive access granted." Kira exhaled. "We're in." The files loaded slowly. Rows of classified reports, mission records, psychological evaluations. Rourke leaned closer. "Jesus, how far back does this go?" "Decades," she whispered. "They've been recruiting operators before they even enlisted." He frowned. "That's impossible." She opened a file. Subject, VANCEKIRAL initiation phase, age 17. Her stomach tightened. It was all there, her academy test scores, shooting metrics, psychological assessments. A note at the bottom read, "Candidate demonstrates high threshold for moral dissonance under duress. Recommend observation." "Moral dissonance," Rourke muttered. "What the hell does that even mean?" "It means they wanted someone who could doubt orders, but still follow them," she said quietly. He stared at the screen. "They built you for this." She closed her eyes. "No, they just noticed early." She opened another file, Project Falcon, Strategic Influence OPERATIONS. Inside were reports detailing false flag strikes, misinformation campaigns, media manipulation. Entire conflicts built on manufactured events to justify funding and control. Every name she recognized was there: generals, contractors, even humanitarian organizations listed as assets of influence. It wasn't just war, it was profit, precision-engineered chaos. Rourke swore under his breath. "So this is what Shaw meant." She nodded. "This is what he ran from." And then she opened the last folder. Project Silent Veil, Field TRALS. The first document was an image feed. A mountain compound, a figure in white. The same man she'd refused to shoot during her test. Below it, text read, subject demonstrated independent ethical reasoning. Candidate elevated to full operative status. Rourke stared. That wasn't a test of skill, that was a loyalty screen. Kira's voice was barely a whisper. They wanted to see if I'd follow conscience over command. And when you did, he said, they made you part of the weapon. She sat back, the light from the screen flickering across her face. Everything she'd believed about her career, every order, every mission, every justification was hollow now. The program wasn't about defending freedom. It was about managing perception, keeping the illusion alive. Evans isn't a commander, she said quietly. He's an architect, he builds obedience. Rourke leaned against the table. So what's next? We leak this. She shook her head. We can't, not yet. The second we go public, they'll brand us as traitors and the story dies before it breathes. Then what? She looked at Shaw, still unconscious. We find someone who can verify it, someone they can't erase. Who the hell's left like that? She didn't answer, not yet. That night she dreamed of Montana. The sound of her father's voice echoing across the range, the smell of oil and pine, the way wind carried through open fields. She remembered the first time she'd hit a moving target, the shock, the pride, the strange, hollow calm afterward. And then she remembered the words that had followed her all her life. You just have to decide you are. In the dream, he turned to her. But his face wasn't her father's anymore. It was Evans. And he smiled. She woke with a jolt, hand instinctively reaching for her sidearm, sweat cold on her neck. Rourke was already awake, watching her. You okay? He asked. She nodded, but her voice was quiet. No. By mid-morning, Shaw stirred. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, then locked onto Kira. You saw it, he rasped. She nodded, all of it. He sighed, then you understand why I ran. She sat beside him. You didn't just run, you built a trail. You wanted someone to find it. He smiled faintly. You're quicker than I was. What now? She asked. Now, he coughed, wincing. Now you choose whether you want to survive or matter. She frowned, meaning. He looked at her. You can stay hidden, keep breathing and watch it all continue, or you can do something about it and vanish like the rest of us. Rourke stepped in from the doorway. That's not much of a choice. Shaw's eyes drifted to him. No, but it's the only one that matters. They didn't have time to decide. The perimeter alarm cracked through the silence, a faint blip, then a shrill tone. Rourke lunged for the console. Motion sensors, we've got movement, east approach. Kira moved to the window. Through her scope, she saw 3 figures advancing, black fatigues, no insignia, moving in perfect formation. Program hit team, she said. They found us. Rourke swore, how the hell? She cut him off. Doesn't matter, we hold them long enough to move Shaw. He grabbed his rifle. You take left, I'll cover the flank. They moved fast, silent, practiced, 2 soldiers operating like one heartbeat. The first man appeared over the ridge. Kira's shot dropped him clean. The second advanced behind cover. Rourke flanked him, close quarters, one burst. The third tried to retreat, calling coordinates into his mic. Kira didn't hesitate. 1 round. Center mass. Silence again. The desert wind carried the smell of smoke and cordite. Rourke leaned against the wall, breathing hard. 3-man recon, more'll come. Kira nodded. We leave now. They loaded Shaw into the chopper, stripped of every tracker, every ID. As Rourke fired up the engines, Kira took one last look at the listening post, the ghosts of wars built on silence. Then she climbed aboard. The helicopter lifted, blades tearing through dawn. Below them, the old station burned. Rourke glanced back at her. So where to? Kira stared ahead, eyes hard. North. There's someone in Bagram who owes me a favor. He raised an eyebrow, high level. Higher than Evans, she said, and more dangerous. He smiled grimly. Perfect. As the sun rose over the jagged horizon, Kira watched the desert stretch out below, endless, silent, indifferent. The kind of silence the program thrived on. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the coin Halford had given her so long ago. The edges were worn now, the Latin nearly rubbed away. Fortis fortuna ad juvat. Fortune favors the brave. But bravery, she'd learned, wasn't about taking the shot. It was about standing still when everyone else pulled the trigger. The helicopter shuddered as wind buffeted it from below. Rourke adjusted the stick, steadying it. You ever think about what happens when we reach the end of this? She didn't look at him. Depends on whether we make it matter first. He nodded slowly. Then let's make it matter. She tucked the coin back into her pocket. For the first time in her life, she wasn't following orders. She was following conviction. And that, she realized, was the most dangerous mission of all. Bagram looked different now. Colder, quieter, like the air itself was watching. The old base had changed hands too many times, coalition, contractors, then shadows. Now it belonged to no one and everyone at once. Their helicopter descended through the haze just before dawn, landing on a cracked tarmac lined with rusted hangars. No lights, no insignias, no flags. Only a single vehicle waited near the edge of the runway, headlights off. Rourke killed the engines, eyes on it. You sure this is the place? Kira nodded. She'll come, she always does. Guess I should have packed flowers. She doesn't like flowers, Kira said. She likes leverage. He chuckled under his breath. My kind of woman. The car door opened. A woman stepped out, early 50s, sharp eyes behind steel-rimmed glasses, her uniform stripped of rank. Kira felt her chest tighten. Colonel Harper, she said. Harper gave a small, knowing smile. It's been a long time, Vance. 4 years, Kira replied. 5, Harper corrected softly. You never could keep count. Rourke stepped forward. You two know each other. Harper's gaze flicked to him, assessing in a single glance. I recruited her. Kira's voice was steady. You signed me into the program. Harper tilted her head. And you're still alive, which means I chose correctly. Kira stepped closer. You knew what they were doing. The colonel didn't flinch. Of course I did. I helped build it. Inside the hangar, the smell of dust and machine oil filled the air. Harper led them to a small operations room, old computers, analog maps, a generator humming in the corner. She closed the door behind them. I'm assuming you didn't risk your neck just to reminisce, Harper said. Kira dropped the flash drive on the table. We found this. Harper stared at it for a long moment. Then quietly, how much did you see? All of it. Then you understand why it can't reach the surface. Rourke frowned. You've got to be kidding me. Harper looked at him. I'm not. If this goes public, governments collapse, markets implode, nations don't survive truth that big. Kira's jaw tightened. Then what's your plan? Keep killing anyone who stumbles too close. Harper sighed, her voice lowering. Kira, listen to me. I didn't design the program to corrupt. I designed it to control chaos, to keep humanity from tearing itself apart. By creating it, Kira snapped. Harper met her eyes, unblinking. By containing it. Rourke leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You people keep using that word like it's salvation. Harper ignored him. You think the world runs on justice, Sergeant. It doesn't. It runs on balance, information, timing, fear. The program was supposed to be the firewall between peace and anarchy. Kira stared at her. So all the deaths, the lies, the staged wars. Collateral stability, Harper said quietly. You can't hold the line without dirty hands. Kira's voice was barely above a whisper. You sound like Evans. Harper smiled sadly. Evans was the one mistake I made. She sat down, folding her hands. I built the program to preserve control. Evans twisted it into a machine for power. He replaced reason with belief, the belief that silence is the only truth worth protecting. Rourke stepped forward, and now he's hunting us. Harper nodded. He'll burn half the world if it means keeping his secret. Then we stop him, Kira said. Harper studied her, expression unreadable. And what will you do after? Expose it all. Watch the world eat itself alive. Kira's voice broke slightly. Maybe the world deserves the truth. Harper's eyes softened, almost pitying. Maybe, but truth without structure is just noise. Silence stretched between them, the kind that felt like an invisible battlefield. Finally, Harper spoke again. There's another way. You don't need to expose the program. You can replace it. Kira frowned. What do you mean? Evans' control network runs through one central relay hub, Black Node. It's buried beneath a decommissioned signal array north of Torcam. You destroy it, you cripple his command. Every operation, every handler, every shadow line gone in an instant. Rourke narrowed his eyes. And you just happen to know where it is. I helped build it, Harper said, before I realized what it would become. She turned to Kira. You want to stop him, you'll need to go back into the silence, one last time. Later outside, Rourke lit a cigarette, the tip glowing faintly in the cold air. She's lying, he said. Kira nodded, partly. Partly. She hates Evans enough to help us, but she's not giving us everything. Rourke exhaled a plume of smoke. So what's the play? Kira looked up at the faint stars above the valley. We take the coordinates, we hit Black Node, and we make sure no one ever uses it again. He raised an eyebrow. You mean destroy it? She nodded, completely. He smiled faintly. Now that's the Kira I remember. They left Bagram before sunrise. Shaw was still weak but lucid, strapped into the rear seat. His voice came through ragged between breaths. You trust her? Kira glanced back. I trust that she wants Evans gone more than she wants me dead. That's not trust, Shaw said. That's gambling. Then let's hope fortune favors the brave, Rourke muttered. The phrase made Kira's chest tighten. The coin felt heavier in her pocket than ever before. The coordinates led them through a valley of silence. No villages, no patrols, not even birds, just wind. By late afternoon, the ground sloped upward into a narrow pass flanked by crumbling rock. From the air it looked empty, but through Kira's scope the truth emerged. Half-buried antenna arrays, concrete bunkers camouflaged as cliffs. Black Node. Rourke whistled under his breath. That's no relay, that's a fortress. Kira adjusted the zoom, and every gun in it belongs to the program. They landed 2 kilometers out, just behind the ridge. Rourke shut down the systems and looked at her. You thinking what I'm thinking? She nodded. Infiltrate, plant charges, and end it before they know we're here. He grinned. See, this is why I like you. Night fell fast. They moved like shadows, silent, low, unseen. Kira counted sentries through her scope, 6 at the entrance. Thermal sensors every 20 meters, no blind spots. Evans built himself a bunker, Rourke whispered. Then we make it his grave, she replied. They cut through the fence and slipped inside the outer ring. The air smelled of metal and dust, sterile, artificial. Deeper in, rows of servers hummed with quiet menace. Each stack pulsed with faint blue light, like veins feeding a digital heart. This is it, Rourke said, the nerve center. Kira set the first charge, then the second, then the third. Everything moved smooth, methodical, until the voice came. From behind. Orion. They froze. Evan stepped from the shadows, calm as ever, his pistol drawn but lowered. "I knew you couldn't resist looking under the curtain," he said. Kira turned slowly, her pulse steady. "You built a system on lies." He smiled, on truth too dangerous to show. Rourke aimed his rifle, "Step away." Evans ignored him. "You think you're stopping corruption, but all you're doing is erasing order. Without the program, you'll have chaos, riots, nations falling apart. You can't unmake the silence without drowning in the noise." Kira's eyes hardened, "Then let it be loud." Evans sighed like a disappointed teacher. "You were my best design, Kira. Precision, discipline, empathy just thin enough to control." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not your design." "Of course you are," he said softly. "Every hesitation, every choice, even your defiance, it's all part of the model." She felt something inside her snap. "No," she whispered, "not anymore." She pulled the detonator from her vest, thumb over the switch. Evan's smile faded. "If you do this, you destroy everything you ever fought for." Maybe it was never worth fighting for. The alarms went off first, sharp, red lights flashing through the dark. Rourke fired. Evans ducked, disappearing behind the servers. "Move," Kira shouted. They sprinted for the exit, bullets ricocheting off metal, the air thick with dust and sparks. Rourke covered her flanks, shouting over the roar, "You ready?" She didn't answer, she didn't need to. They dove through the tunnel just as the first explosion hit. The shockwave threw them forward, slamming them into the rock. Fire swallowed the corridor behind them. The servers screamed one last electric wail before silence returned, real, total silence. When Kira opened her eyes, everything was orange dust, flame, and ash. Rourke groaned beside her, bleeding from a cut across his brow. "You alive?" she asked. "Define alive," he muttered. She helped him to his feet. The entrance behind them had collapsed. The valley glowed from the fire still burning underground. Rourke looked back at the inferno. "Think that did it?" Kira nodded slowly. "He's gone, all of it's gone." He exhaled, relief mixing with exhaustion. "So now what?" She looked toward the rising sun. "Now," she said softly, "we tell the story right." Hours later, they sat on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, silent, covered in soot. Rourke watched the horizon. "You think Harper will let this stay buried?" Kira shook her head. "She'll rebuild it, maybe smaller, maybe quieter, but it'll come back." "So what's the point then?" She turned to him. "The point is someone has to remember it wasn't supposed to be this way." He smiled faintly. "And that someone's you." She looked at the desert stretching out below, endless and indifferent. "No," she said, "it's anyone who decides not to look away." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of burned metal and sand. Kira pulled the coin from her pocket one last time. The Latin inscription was nearly gone now, worn down by years of use, sweat, and memory. She turned it over in her hand, then set it on the rock beside her. Rourke looked at her. "You're leaving it behind." She nodded. "Fortune doesn't favor the brave, Rourke, it tests them." He studied her for a moment. "So where do we go?" She smiled faintly. "Anywhere quiet enough to start again." The horizon shimmered with morning heat. Two silhouettes against the light. Two ghosts who'd chosen to live. And somewhere far below, beneath the dust and fire, the silence finally broke. There's a kind of silence that isn't peace. It's just the space left after everything you believed has burned away. That's what the desert felt like now. A graveyard of noise, still smoking beneath the horizon. The program was gone, the servers, the missions, the lies, all ash. But the world hadn't changed. Not really. And maybe that was the point. 3 days later, a convoy passed through the Panjshir Valley. Aid trucks, civilians, a handful of soldiers. None of them noticed the two figures watching from the cliffs above, a woman and a man, dressed in dust and silence. Kira Vance, Ian Rourke. They were ghosts now. No records, no rank, no country. Just two people who had done something unforgivable in the name of something unexplainable. They hid the helicopter deep in a cave system and began moving on foot. Every night, they made small fires that never stayed lit for long. Every morning, they walked until the horizon turned white with heat. Rourke said little, conserving breath, conserving thoughts. Kira spoke less. Her body moved automatically, like every step was part of a calculation she hadn't yet solved. Sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, she swore she could still hear Evan's voice, that calm authority, threading through her memory. You can't unmake the silence without drowning in the noise. She wanted to hate him. But what she felt instead was something worse, understanding. Because he wasn't wrong. Noise could destroy things too. Truth could shatter just as easily as lies. But there was something he'd never understood, something she'd only just begun to. That humanity doesn't need silence to survive. It needs people brave enough to listen through the noise. By the fifth night, Rourke's wound had started to reopen. The cut along his temple was deeper than they'd realized. Kira patched him up as best she could, pressing gauze against the edge of the scar. He winced. "You're getting good at this." "I've had practice." He smiled weakly. "You ever think about what happens when we stop running?" She looked at him. "You mean if?" "No, when." She didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "Then we start over, small, quiet, somewhere the world isn't watching." Rourke chuckled softly. "And what'll you do? Open a coffee shop, teach long-range ballistics to tourists?" She almost smiled. "Maybe I'll just stop pointing guns at people." He laughed. Then the sound faded into the wind, swallowed by distance. They reached the outskirts of a mountain village by dawn. A cluster of mud brick homes, a mosque, a single dirt road leading to nowhere. The villagers didn't ask who they were. They just saw the weariness in their eyes and made room at the fire. That's the thing about people who live close to war. They don't need names to recognize survivors. For a few days, they stayed there. Rourke helped mend a broken generator. Kira spent her hours on the ridge, watching the children play in the dust, their laughter echoing where gunfire used to. It reminded her of home. Montana skis, her father's range, the smell of rain before a storm. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a weapon. She felt like a person. But peace, she knew, wasn't a place you found. It was something you learned to carry. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the valley, a small boy approached her on the ridge. He couldn't have been more than 8. He pointed at the rifle lying beside her. "Is that yours?" he asked in Pashto. She nodded. "It is." He squinted. "Why do you have it?" The question stopped her cold. Because once, a long time ago, someone else had asked her almost the same thing in a different desert, under a different sky. "What are you doing with the Barrett .50, sweetheart?" Back then, the answer had been simple. Now it was. She looked at the boy. Because sometimes you need something that can see farther than fear. He frowned, not understanding, but smiled anyway. Then he ran back toward the village, leaving her alone with the echo of her own words. That night, she took the TAC-50 apart piece by piece. Barrel, bolt, scope, stock. The same way her father had taught her. Only this time, she didn't clean it. She buried it. 6 feet into the hard mountain soil, beside the ridge where the wind blew constant. When she finished, she stood over the spot for a long time, the moonlight catching in her eyes. Rourke walked up behind her. "Burying the past?" he asked. "Just the part that doesn't fit anymore." He nodded. "You sure?" She looked at him, the faintest smile touching her lips. No, but it's time. Days turned into weeks. Word spread through the mountains of a nameless woman who fixed broken radios, translated for aid convoys, and carried no weapon. Some said she'd once been a soldier. Others said she was just another refugee. No one ever really knew. And that was how she wanted it. Rourke stayed nearby, flying small supply runs for whoever needed help. Sometimes he'd vanish for a week, sometimes longer, but he always came back. Neither of them talked about the program anymore. But the silence between them wasn't haunted like before. It was healing. One night during a storm, he found her sitting alone outside, rain soaking through her jacket. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I was just thinking." "About what?" "About how easy it is to lose yourself in the name of doing good." He sat beside her. "You think we lost ourselves?" She looked at him. "I think we found out who we really were when everything else was gone." He smiled faintly. "That's something, I guess." She turned to him. "You ever wonder if people like us get to be forgiven?" He stared out at the dark horizon. "I don't know, but maybe forgiveness isn't something you get. Maybe it's something you give to yourself when you finally stop pretending you were ever perfect." She nodded slowly. "You sound like my father." "Smart man," he said. "He was," she whispered. "He just didn't get to see what I became." Rourke put a hand on her shoulder. "If he could see you now, I think he'd be proud." Kira's eyes glistened in the rain. "I don't know if pride's the right word." "Then maybe peace," he said quietly, "and that's worth more." When morning came, the storm was gone. The sky was clear, the air washed clean. Kira walked down to the edge of the valley, where the wind carried the sound of distant laughter. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the old coin, the one Halford had given her years ago. It was tarnished now, the engraving nearly worn smooth. "Fortis Fortuna ad Juvat." She turned it over, feeling the weight of it one last time. Then she closed her eyes and let it fall into the river below. The sound it made when it hit the water was small, almost nothing. But to her it was everything. Somewhere far away, in a government office buried beneath another name, Colonel Harper stared at a classified report. It detailed the destruction of Black Node, the presumed deaths of Orion 9 and Raven. She read it twice, then quietly closed the file. In the margin, she wrote a single sentence. Silence restored for now. Then she looked out the window, at a world spinning on, blissfully unaware of the ghosts keeping its balance. Her reflection stared back, tired, older, but still unbroken. And somewhere deep inside, she felt something she hadn't in years. Regret. Months passed. Winter came to the mountains, and with it quiet snow. Kira stood outside the small stone house she and Rourke had built, smoke rising from the chimney behind her. She watched the snow fall on the ridges, slow, steady, unhurried. Peace didn't roar, it whispered. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid to listen. She thought about everyone she'd met, Halford, Hayes, Evans, Harper. Each had taught her something, even in their failure. From Halford, she'd learned that respect couldn't be given, it had to be earned. From Hayes, that silence could be kind. From Evans, that control without conscience was just fear in a suit. And from Harper, that even those who build cages sometimes dream of wings. But mostly, she'd learned something simpler. That the strongest people weren't the ones who pulled the trigger. They were the ones who decided when not to. As the wind brushed her face, she whispered to herself, not a prayer, not a promise, just a truth. "I'm still here." And that, she realized, was enough. Because survival wasn't victory. It was permission to try again, to choose differently, to be better the next time. Rourke stepped out onto the porch, coffee steaming in his hands. "Another long night?" he asked. She smiled. Not as long as the last one. He handed her the mug. You thinking about going back? She looked at him. No, I'm thinking about finally being still. He nodded. Good. The world's loud enough without you shooting at it. She laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that carried more healing than humor. They stood there in silence, watching the sun rise over the peaks. And for a moment, everything was simple again. Two people, one sky and the promise of nothing but today. Voiceover final lines. They used to say silence was safety, that it kept the world from falling apart. But I think they were wrong. Silence doesn't keep the world together. People do, the ones who choose to listen, even when the truth hurts. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The wind moved across the ridge, carrying her words into the white. And for the first time in a long, long time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned.